Well, good evening. Hope you're well. I just want to share a little something with you. As I've been reading over these past few weeks, I'd mentioned at our prayer meeting before this all started, before this all kicked off with our coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic, I shared a little devotional from this book here. This is Sinclair Ferguson's To Seek and to Save, which I heartily recommended. The Christmas devotional, Love Came Down at Christmas, and this was the same. These are daily reflections from Luke, and it has really blessed me. It has really blessed me as I've been reading it down through this Easter season, and just in the run-up in this Easter week. I would just like to share these with you. The devotionals for this week from this book. I hope Sinclair doesn't mind, but I really would recommend that you can get these from the Good Book Company. So really, if I haven't made that clear enough, I would recommend this devotional book. Doesn't have to be read at Easter, but do get it. It'll challenge you, and if you've read any of Sinclair Ferguson's works, you'll know just how well he puts things across, and so simply that he makes such biblical points. But anyway, I've used this, and I'm currently still using it. So I just want to read today's to you. It's from Luke 23. Luke 23, and this is verses 6 to 12, and Jesus is before Herod. It says this: when Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. And Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other. And so there we find Jesus, and he is sent by Pilate to Herod. He's sent to Herod Antipas, son of Herod the Great. We have seen ourselves in the City Mission in Rathcoole as we have been looking at the Gospel of Mark, and we have seen just how foolish this man can be. He promised his wife's daughter anything up to half his kingdom, just so he could watch her dance, and she in turn asked for John the Baptist's head, and he had to keep up appearances. He couldn't be seen to be not a man of his word, and so he had to deliver on his promise, and she got John the Baptist's head on a plate. We read, as we just did there, that when Herod seen Jesus, when word got to him that Pilate had sent Jesus to him, that he is glad. He gets those butterflies in his stomach. He gets the heart is racing a little bit faster. There's an excitement about it. I mean, there had been a time when someone had mentioned Jesus to him, and it would have given him pause for thought. It would have made him take a step back and take stock a little bit. I mean, he believed that Jesus' miracles, again, a few verses before the whole debacle with John the Baptist in his head, he believes that perhaps John the Baptist has been is reincarnated, is back from the dead in the person of Jesus. And then we get that recount almost as a looking back in the Gospel of Mark, as we see what happened to John the Baptist. But there's a time where he thinks that perhaps John the Baptist has come back, and he's come back in this man, Jesus, as these miracles have indicated, or so he seems to think. But not now. Now Herod is glad when Jesus is coming. He long desires to see him. We read there in the Bible. He'd heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. Let me read a little bit about what Sinclair Ferguson says here. He says, so with neither a sense of guilt or remorse for what he had done to John, or any compassion for the figure who stood before him, exhausted and demeaned, Herod questioned the Lord Jesus. But Jesus had long ago spoken his last word to Herod Antipas. Go and tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I finish my course. And there would be no further message now, not even in response to Herod's insistent questioning. Thus the most ancient prophecy fulfilled. And he quotes from Isaiah 53. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, like a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Herod's not in isolation here. Herod's not on his own. There's chief priests, and there's his minions. They're there with him, and they're berating him. They're baying for his blood. They're mocking him. They join in with the contemptuous mocking of Jesus. And again, there are shades of that. Isaiah 53, where he's despised and rejected by men, where he's a man of sorrows, where he's acquainted with grief. And so what Herod does as well here, he hatches one more scheme. He has one more plan in mind for the Lord Jesus. He puts him in some splendid robes. He dresses him up in the finest array. And then he sends him back to Pilate. And we finished there in verse 12, and we read that Pilate and Herod, who had been at odds with one another, who hadn't seen eye to eye, in their mutual disregard of Jesus, brought them closer to each other. Indeed, the enemy of my enemy was my friend when it came to Pilate and Herod and Jesus. Jesus, who here, as we said, like a sheep before his shearers, is silent. He knows, this is what Sinclair Ferguson says, he will bear man's judgment against himself because he knows it is God's judgment on those in whose place he stands. He knows that this is the only way in which he can save us. And we have to remember, as we read down through the Easter story, as we read in these days coming up to Good Friday, when Jesus is nailed to that cruel cross and he dies that criminal's death, we have to remember, we have to keep in mind that in every cruel detail, it was all as God had planned. In every cruel detail, it was all that God had planned, and it was all endured for us. Christ went through all of the the scorn and the mocking and the beating and the pain and the suffering, and he went through it for us, for you and for me. I'll finish with another quote from this devotion from Sinclair Ferguson. It says, "As soon the early Christians would come to understand this, truly in this city, Jerusalem, there were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your plan had predestined to take place." That's a quote from Acts 4:27 and 28. One of the things I love about this book as well is that there are a couple of questions. There's a time to reflect, and there's a time to think about what God has been doing or saying or to us. And so I want to leave these two questions with you. And do reflect on them and ask them yourself. God can weave even human wickedness into his sovereign plan of salvation. Isn't that the truth? And we, whether it's Joseph and what you meant for evil, God meant for good, we can see that down through scriptures. Have you seen that in your own experience? Have a think about whether you've seen that in your own past, in your own experience. And how does that strengthen you to face trouble in the future? The Bible tells us that I, the Lord, he says, do not change. And we can be heartened, we can be encouraged that the God that has brought us through trial and through fire in the past is the same God that we look to and that we worship in the present and in every day that he will bless us with. So again, I'll be doing this every night this week, right up to Easter Sunday. One more time, I'll recommend this again. It's Sinclair Ferguson's To Seek and to Save. Their daily reflections from Luke on the Road to the Cross from the Good Book Company. I've been Jordan from the Belfast City Mission Rathcoole, and I'll see you tomorrow morning where we have the next chapter in our Jesus Storybook Bible, and we have something a little bit special, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Good night and God bless, and I'll see you tomorrow. What happened there? I definitely pushed that button.